The Civil War, a desperate time in our nation's great history, a country divided based on political and ethical beliefs. The North, or the Union, was led by the 16th President, Abraham Lincoln. The South, or the Confederacy, was led by Jefferson Davis. Each side had stark differences which built up over time, leading to one of the bloodiest wars in all of history, pitting fellow countrymen against each other. Hard political decisions would be made, but nothing compared to the brutal battles which would ensue. Because medicine was not advanced, there were massive casualty rates and many more were severely wounded. Slavery was abolished and the Union won as a result of tireless war efforts from patriots on both sides. This may be one of the most pivotal moments in America's history, however it occurred back in the 19th century. Film was not even conceived during this time period and photos were rarely taken. We have to rely on written texts, paintings, and poems for historical insight on the various aspects of the Civil War. One such historical piece is the poem "O Captain, My Captain," written by Walt Whitman. The subject of "O Captain, My Captain" is the captain of the ship. The setting is during a battle on the sea where the ship is being attacked. The tone is panic due to the death of their captain. The purpose is to show how much America needed a great leader. The audience is the American people after the death of Abraham Lincoln. The diction of this poem is panic and desperation. The syntax of the poem is 4 stanzas, typical to a standard poem. The historical figure being indirectly discussed in this piece is Abraham Lincoln. The historical event being discussed is Lincoln's assassination. The historical event affects the speaker's life because he lost his father. There were no historical inaccuracies. Themes include death and the questioning of the future of America. The poem is interesting because it talks about the assassination of President Lincoln. When I read this poem, I think of the death of Abraham Lincoln after the Civil War and how it would affect America in the years to come. The poem asks you to think about the future without a strong leader. The poem tells us that society relied on Lincoln to be a strong leader that the people depended on. Some things that changed since the Civil War is equality throughout all races and peace between the North and South. The characters are the father, who represents Abraham Lincoln, and the speaker, who represents the American people. Conflicts presented is the death of the captain, and it does not become resolved. Themes of the poem are death and fear of the future without a strong leader. The main causes of the Civil War were tension between the North and South and the differences between each of their mindsets. The North wanted to be ruled by a federal government, but the South wanted it to stay the way it was and ruled by the state. The Battle Hymn of the Republic was a song written by Julia Ward Howe in 1861 and published in the Atlantic Monthly in February of 1862. The tune which the lyrics were set to was composed several years earlier and had been used with several different sets of lyrics as both a campfire spiritual song and a marching song for Confederate troops. The Battle Hymn of the Republic was a song written by Julia Ward Howe in 1861 and published in the Atlantic Monthly in February of 1862. The tune which the lyrics were set to was composed several years earlier and had been used with several different sets of lyrics as both a campfire spiritual song and a marching song for Confederate troops. The lyrics in this version, however, display a very religious and almost self-righteous tone. They include many biblical references, most likely in order to state that the North believes that they have a moral high ground in this war and that God is on their side. The glory and triumph of God against the wicked also seems to be a central theme of this piece. Howe first heard the tune being sung with several different lyrics at a public review of a group of Union troops. A reverend who was with her at the time suggested that she should write new lyrics, so that night she woke up while it was still dark and the lyrics reportedly came to her, so she quickly scribbled them down. Her lyrics were primarily intended for Confederate troops who would be marching to it. However, it also became popular with Northern citizens after the war, as it kept their spirits up and reassured them that they were on the righteous side of the conflict. This is a recording of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. The next piece is the Emancipation Proclamation made by Abraham Lincoln, abolishing slavery. The subject is of the Civil War. On January 1st, 1863, U.S. President Abraham Lincoln declared free all slaves residing in territory in rebellion against the federal government. This Emancipation Proclamation actually freed few people. It did not apply to slaves in the border states fighting on the Union side, nor did it affect slaves in the southern areas already under Union control. The proclamation showed that the Civil War was now being fought to end slavery. It had a warning but forthright tone, and its audience was the people of the United States, as well as the slaves. Lincoln, not only in his Emancipation Proclamation, but in most of his works, has a strong, varied diction. Along with his articulate diction is his well-developed syntax that goes with it. An example that shows this is the Emancipation Proclamation, "And I hereby enjoin upon the people so declared to be free to abstain from all violence, unless in necessary self-defense, and I recommend to them that in all cases, when allowed, they labor faithfully for reasonable wages." Lincoln is the historical figure of the Emancipation Proclamation. He, in his work, is declaring slaves in the rebellious territories free and wants them to have equal rights and wages. The historical event being discussed is the Civil War and slavery. The main theme of the Emancipation Proclamation is slavery and freeing the slaves. Lincoln mentions slavery many times in his work and talks about how the government will view those free slaves as free. Lincoln wrote this proclamation because he wanted to free the slaves, and the only way to do so would be to directly free them. It makes the reader see how Lincoln stood up for the slaves, and makes the reader also think about if Lincoln really cared about them or just wanted to end the war. The conflict is slavery and is resolved when Lincoln writes his Emancipation Proclamation and pronounces it to the people. Slavery is also the central theme as well as a motif. Equality is also a motif of the work. The main cause of the Civil War was slavery. When Lincoln frees the slaves, he thinks that it ends the war. The Emancipation Proclamation did not end slavery in the entire U.S. This was achieved by the passage of the 13th Amendment of the Constitution in 1865. This next piece is a painting titled "Raise the Colors and Follow Me" by Mort Kunstler. It depicts the Irish 69th Brigade of Massachusetts as they are fighting during the Battle of Antietam. This unit will be remembered for its bravery and courage during this battle. They would lose many men, yet their bravery shone through and were awarded countless medals after the Civil War. The painting depicts a charge led by Colonel Riley on the battlefields of Antietam. Although there were not many Irish brigades, this one was almost fully Irish and was led by an Irish colonel. The Irish would gain fame through this act of bravery. Prior to this, Irish were just viewed as petty immigrants with little or no value. However, their true bravery and sacrifice was recognized through this painting. The painting depicts a scene of great bravery and courage and was painted in 1892, many years after the war. This next piece is a film called Glory. The movie Glory was released in 1989, and its main stars were Matthew Broderick, Denzel Washington, and Morgan Freeman. The film follows the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Regiment as they fight in the Civil War for the Union. However, there is something special about this unit. They are all African American. However, the unit is led by white Colonel Robert Shaw. This was one of the first African American units to see combat, and unfortunately it was mainly created as an experiment by the Union to show that African Americans were fit to be soldiers. Colonel Shaw first commanded an all-white unit at the Battle of Antietam, where his regiment suffered heavy casualties. Shaw himself was wounded very badly and was presumed dead and ordered to be buried by the battlefield. However, he was awakened by a black gravedigger who took him to a hospital. This gave him a new perspective on the compassion and equality of African Americans. Because of his bravery on the battlefield, Shaw is promoted to colonel. He is then asked to lead an all-African American unit, which he accepts. The diction of this film follows many historical accuracies of the Civil War period. The audience is modern-day people who are looking to gain insight on the hardships that African Americans faced on the battlefield and at home. The subject is to show the true equality of African Americans and how the Civil War changed the views of many Americans. The tone fluctuates from deep prejudice to camaraderie between all races. In the end, Colonel Shaw is killed in battle, but this draws their regiment and the races as a whole together. The conflict that was resolved was the racial differences between whites and blacks.
Miss McKay, an American history teacher at LC, had some comments on this topic. Throughout her years at LC, Miss McKay has found that slaves were treated terribly by the South, but not as terribly as you think. Only 25% of whites owned slaves down south. She also concluded on the fact that the Civil War was not mainly fought over slaves. It was mainly fought over states' rights.
These literary pieces give us direct insight into life during the Civil War for many different demographics.